Hello, my creeplings. It's time for another installment of movies I watched this week. um, this one is, I guess, considered a cult classic. It shows up a lot in articles and such I've read on like the history of the supernatural television show, etc., etc. And I don't mean the show supernatural, I mean the genre supernatural. This is The Night Stalker, which is a 1972 made for TV movie that a lot of people talk about, that had not only spawned a sequel direct to TV, but also a one season television series in the 70s that then got revived in the 2015? No, 2005, excuse me. Which that's where I had heard about this. I saw an ad for the reboot called The Night Stalker. We never got around to watching it. And like I said, I'd heard so much about this. I mean, I know made for TV, especially, ABC, isn't going to be very gory. So basically, I watched this to get a feel for 1970s supernatural television. B, I wanted to see if the writing was any good. And C, just morbid curiosity, because I had seen this thing come up quite a bit over the years when the articles would talk about the Twilight Zone TV series, Tales from the Dark Side, the TV series. It kept coming up, so I thought, well, what the hey, I'll sit down and watch it, right? It was okay. I think because it was made for TV's, 1970s era, I didn't get into it as much as I thought I could. But just to give you the specs on it, this is The Night Stalker, released in 1972 on ABC, January 11th, on ABC here in the United States. This is based on a, at the time, as of unreleased, I believe they novelized it and released it later, novel by Jeff Rice called The Night Stalker. The other big name that was attached to this was producer Dan Curtis. He was known for mostly the supernatural soap opera Dark Shadows, which I'll admit I love it because it not only gothic horror, but it's so fucking cheesy. I saw that involved with here, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll get, my level of, where it's ridiculously cheesy. It's enjoyable. And it didn't quite hit there for me, but again, we'll keep going on. This again was their ABC movie of the week. Your cast list, I'm not familiar with a lot of the names simply because it's 1970s character actors, and I'll be the first to admit it, the 70s are not one of my favorite decades. Sorry, anybody who grew up in the 70s. I'm not saying they were all bad. I'm just saying I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so therefore that's like my favorite decades. And then I like to go back even farther. The 70s were just kind of a meh point for me. That's personal taste. I'm not knocking anybody who does like this era. But cast Darren McGavin as Carl Kolchack, or I've heard it pronounced Kolchack too. Character actor, plays a lot of dads. I specifically remember him from a Disney Channel original movie, a DCOM, called Ollie Hopnoodle's Haven of Bliss, which is, strangely enough, kind of a sequel to A Christmas Story. He was the dad in A Christmas Story, too, now that I think about it. So he made a career of playing character. He's a character actor. I do appreciate his work. Whenever I see him show up in something, I know I'm not going to get bored with his character. So we have Carol Lynley as Gail Foster, Simon Oakland as Tony Vincenzo. His voice sounds familiar, but I can't place where. Ralph Meeker as Bertie Jenks, Claude Atkins as Sheriff Ward A. Butcher. Part of me wonders if there's any relation to Tom Atkins there, but I don't know. Charles McGraw as Police Chief Ed Masterson. Kent Smith as District Attorney Tom Payne. Elisha Cook Jr. as Mickey Crawford. Stanley Adams as Fred Hurley. Larry Linville as Dr. Robert McGurgy. Jordan Rhodes as Dr. John O'Brien. And Barry Atwater as Janos Skorsny. Like I said, this was one of those that I think if they had played it a little more tongue-in-cheek, I'd appreciate it a little more, but they tried to play it a little too straight. I still might check out this TV series that was spun off of this, but we'll get into that in a minute. So, this place takes place in Las Vegas, and it's modern day, so Las Vegas in the 70s. There's a series of murders plaguing the strip. All of the victims are females. All of the bodies have shown up drained of blood. Now, Carl Kolchack, played by Darren McGavin, is a veteran reporter who's been fired from newspapers all over the country. There's an interesting little exchange with him and the girlfriend later on where they're talking about exactly where he's been fired from, how many times out of New York and Chicago and Boston he's been fired from newspapers. It's kind of funny, but it's kind of not. He keeps getting fired because he has a very tenacious and very unprofessional approach to writing to getting a story. Kolchack gets just enough information that he starts to get this theory that that the killer thinks he's a vampire. That's what he keeps trying to tell people, but everyone's like, you keep jumping to conclusions that this guy is a vampire. He's like, no, I think the guy thinks he's a vampire. Well, the more that, this goes on, and the more victims that show up, and, more crimes are committed. A man, attempts to rob the hospital blood bank. He succeeds once, attempts a second time. During the second one, he's shot multiple times and escapes, outrunning a police car and a motorcycle. So we're seeing, and during the fight, you're seeing notes of supernatural strength, supernatural speed, supernatural abilities. Kolchack has all this information in front of him. He wants to write an article. He wants to get it out there. Well, his editor, Vincenzo, refuses to run the story under the vampire angle without solid proof. And let's face it, no one's going to take anything as solid proof when it comes to a supernatural event like this. He argues that it's going to cause panic with the people and possibly tank the paper's reputation. Okay, Vincenzo, I'll give you that one, especially the panic by, the general public. Now, there's some eyewitness testimony and then more research. The police finally get an ID on the thief of the blood bank as 70-year-old Janos Skorsny, who's a prime suspect in multiple homicides all over Europe, extending back years, all involving massive losses of blood to the bodies that were found. Okay, so we have bloodless bodies. We have a guy robbing a blood bank. He's 70 years old, but he's super fucking strong and fast. Okay, yeah, this really is looking like he's a vampire or something. Now, Kolchack's girlfriend, Gail, works in the casino as a change girl. She's like, well, what if it is? What if you're right? She gets in this big book, everything you want to ask about vampires, but are afraid to ask. And she's like, you need to look into this. Now, between the evidence and reading that book, Kolchack's like, okay, he probably is a vampire. So following another failed attempt to capture Janos Skorsny, authorities strike a deal with Kolchack. They want to, they will forget their regular traditional investigative methods for his vampire-centric approach in exchange for giving him exclusive rights to the story. Acting on a tip, he's got a guy that he knows that is able to talk to realtors. He locates Skorzny's house and pursues the story on his own. Before the cops even get there, he wants unhindered access to evidence. So he finds stolen blood packets in the refrigerator, a coffin with soil inside, we're to assume it's native soil. Again, big thing in vampire lore. One of the victims is still alive. She's bound and gagged to a bed with an IV line drawing blood, so personal cocktail shaker there. There's all other incriminating. He takes photos of it all. I believe he frees the girl. Skorzny returns, though, and Kolchack is compromised. They struggle. Kolchack is wrestled to the floor. Now his friend, who's an FBI agent, Bernie Jenks, arrives and joins the fight. And it goes until dawn breaks. Kolchack and Bernie pull back the shades, and Janos just is paralyzed. They stake him just as authorities burst through the door. So Kolchack, they get the guy. Kolchack gets to write his story. He's so jazzed. He's talking to Gail while he's typing. He proposes, telling her that they're going to move to New York and they're going to be so successful, etc., etc. The authorities, however, they don't want to publicly admit that Skorzny was a vampire. So they print a false version of the newspaper story with his byline and threaten to charge him with first-degree murder of Janos Skorzny unless he quietly leaves town. Gail has already been coerced into leaving because they consider her an undesirable element. I think they were hinting at the fact that maybe they thought she was a prostitute instead of just working at the casino. So we leave at the end of the movie. Kolchack is sitting in a hotel room listening to a replay of a dictation of the Skorzny case. You find out he exhausted his savings placing personal ads across the country in an attempt to find Gail. He hasn't found her yet. He explains, in this voiceover that if anyone tries to verify the events, they'll find that any witnesses have either left town, aren't talking, or are dead. Skorzny and all of his victims have been cremated as to destroy the bodies, because that destroys any ability to investigate the matter further and eliminates the possibility that anyone killed by Skorzny will resurrect as a vampire themselves. And that's where we leave the end of this movie. If I were a kid in the 70s watching this as a movie of the week with my family, I probably would have loved it. But as I'm a 40-something-year-old woman in the, year 2025, I found it a bit flat. I'm not knocking any of the performances. You've got your typical hard-nosed cops and gruff newspaper editor. You've got your hard-nosed investigative reporter. They're all great character archetypes, and they're all played to a T. I just think it was the limitations of 1970s broadcast TV that kind of flattened this out for me. But again, now I'm interested enough to try and track down the sequel to this, The Night Strangler, even though I have no idea what it was about, other than probably some guy strangling, most likely women, in the night. And I definitely want to try to find the series, which is Kolchack the Night Stalker. Now, believe it or not, this had the highest ratings of any TV film at the time. They were doing Nielsen shares. So out of a 48 share, they got 33.2. So that was really high for the time. So in 1973, they had a TV film called The Night Stranglers, a follow-up. And a planned 1974 film titled The Night Killers, but that evolved into the 74-75 series Kolchack the Night Stalker, all starring Darren McGavin. Um, there's an episode of the series called The Vampire, which is an actual sequel to this. So again, I'm kind of interested as to how that worked out, as it derives its story from characters from the film. So yeah, like I said, then there was the reboot in 2005 of the series that they just called Night Stalker, which again seems like it could be interesting. But yeah, this was interesting, but I'm not gonna tell everybody to go out and rent it or go out and find it. I again found mine on the Internet Archive. All hail the archive. So this wasn't bad, but it definitely felt flat. But I'm interested enough to look into the follow-up media. But if you are a gorehound, if you want some really freaky, detailed information, going down that route, you're going to be severely disappointed. Because again, it was a TV movie from the 70s. If I were a teenager back then, I probably would have loved it. I could see where it got, large shares simply because of Darren McGavin being a popular character actor at the time. I think a lot of people knew that name. And it wasn't what was going on for movies of the week at that time. If I remember correctly, a lot of movies of the week at that time were like biographies of celebrities and book adaptations of romances. So this was something different. It's not bad, not the greatest. If you like that kind of stuff, try it out. If not, it's skippable. So, on that note, I think I'm going to say, I'm going to call it a night for tonight. I've been very busy today with prepping for the channel and doing stuff for all of y'all. So I'm just going to say a good night, my creeplings, and do it with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.